This weekend, we were in Baltimore, Maryland for the Charm City UCI races, and having only ridden my bike for less than 10 hours over the last 2 weeks, my expectations were not very high going into the weekend. Here's how it played out. If you've been following along, you'll remember that on day 2 at Go Cross in Roanoke, Virginia, I had surprised myself by finishing 5th because I didn't really feel that good going into the race. And unfortunately, that week I ended up catching a bug, not COVID, that had prevented me from getting any solid amount of training. And I only rode my bike 3 hours, including the Friday pre-ride between Go Cross and Rochester. Not good. That's not even enough riding to maintain fitness. Bummer. However, I was pretty optimistic that I'd just be extra fresh for that weekend's races. If you stop training for a short period of time, this means that your freshness score will go up. This is good before big races. At the same time, your fitness declines. Train too low for too long, and your fitness will drop too much. And while I felt decent for Saturday's race at Rochester, I managed to pull off a 12th place finish and snag a few more UCI points, but started to feel even worse that night and Sunday morning. And so I decided to pull the plug after just doing one lap of pre-ride on Sunday's course, and figured I could get home an entire day early and promote some recovery and rest. Not starting a race is a tough call to make. And when it comes to health and sickness, you should always opt for the safer decision and do what's best for your overall health. So at this point, it had been over a week that I had been dealing with this minor illness, and it had set me back quite a bit. That week, I decided to try and do some intervals on Wednesday to try and sharpen the legs before Charm City. And while I didn't quite feel 100%, I did feel a lot better and managed to get through a good amount of those intervals before pulling the plug. However, that weekend at Charm City, I couldn't not race because I needed some more UCI points to be able to solidify my spot for the US World Cup roster. So once again, I was in the car traveling to Baltimore, Maryland, and my only goal for that weekend was to get more UCI points. The course at Charm City was pretty tough. There were a lot of turns and a lot of pedaling, but you could find a few sections of the course where you could make up time on your competitors if you pushed the pace. At the same time, it also had a Euro feel for it. What I mean by this is that the venue itself didn't have necessarily anything spectacular about it, but by throwing a bunch of man-made features onto that venue, you have a pretty exciting course. This is a lot of times what they do in Europe. In fact, at one race in Belgium, they go onto a boat. That's crazy. The main sections to gain time are going to be on the uphill, heavy pedaling sections, especially when other riders get tired later in the race. There was a big, scary off-camber section in the middle of the track. And this part of the course was not only the most technical part of the course because you really had to nail your line or you'd clip a pedal and biff it, and if you did that, you were losing a bunch of time. But it was also the most physically demanding part of the course too, because you had to climb gradually all the way up to that off-camber before you did the section itself. So not only is your heart rate tapped, but you're also having to concentrate to hold your line in that section of the trail. This slight uphill portion of the course was one of those sections where I was gaining a lot of time. There happened to be a little bit of a downhill going into it, so I'd hit that downhill pretty hard in an attempt to carry a lot of momentum through that chicane on the uphill, and I realized that I was gaining a lot of time on this particular section of the course. And while I was burning a match to get that speed, it was definitely a match worth burning. Add in 2 stair flyovers, a set of really high barriers, and a bunch of steep, punchy, tight turns, and you've got yourself a pretty tough course. In fact, my heart rate rarely dropped below 190 because of how little recovery I was able to find on this course. Saturday was the bigger of the 2 days because it was a C1 UCI race. The C1 classification means deeper points going to the top 15 rather than only the top 10 in a C2 classification. The monetary payout is also quite larger, increasing the motivation of athletes. After a mediocre weekend in Rochester, I had been demoted to the second row in the number 10 spot call-up. And after a mediocre start, I was sitting about 15th place, despite having pulled out of my pedal in the middle of that start. However, at the same time, Curtis White also snapped a chain. So there was a lot of chaos happening in the peloton right off the start line, and that kind of helped me not to lose so many spots in the start. After the first few turns, we hit the first big punchy climb, and this guy comes blazing on my inside and makes the pass. And at first I was like, whoa, easy partner. And then I realized who it was. It's Christopher Blevins making his way to the front of the race where he belonged. So I had, in the middle of this, said, sorry man, you can have it, and he laughed and said thanks. At the end of lap 1, I was sitting about 15th place, but wasn't too concerned because I could look ahead and see that quite a few of the people ahead of me were probably going to blow a gasket and that I'd pass them later in the race. However, at the end of 2 or 3 laps, we were still 15 strong and I was at the back end of the group. So I figured I needed to start moving forward, and so I started making passes on guys here and there. One of these passes was at the top of one of the flyovers where it turned, and this wasn't a good pass at all. I tried to pass on the inside, and when I was doing it, I clipped my hip bone on one of the metal poles that constructed this flyover. Running into metal poles mid-race does not increase race performance. I could have fallen off the whole flyover if I had hit it hard enough, but luckily I was able to keep it upright. However, when I hit the start-finish straight, I could tell that this was not good. My whole right leg was in pain, my hip was killing me, and so I took about a half a lap to reassess and figure out what was going on with my leg. After about a half lap, I had decided that my hip was not broken, and I continued to push forward. He totally broke his hip. I quickly caught the wheels of Cody Cup and Caleb Schwartz, and about a lap later opened up a pretty good gap on them on one of the climbs on the course. At this point, I stayed pretty steady for the rest of the race, eventually catching on to the wheel of Brandon Fix, who I rode with for a few laps. We also realized that Curtis White was making a pretty strong surge after snapping his chain on the start line, and he was catching us pretty quickly. So, in my head, I said, I am going to try to hold him off for as long as possible, and managed to hold him off for quite some time. But it was inevitable, and he ended up catching us. And in that process, I ended up just pulling over and letting Curtis pass us because I knew he was going faster than I was. And in the middle of that, I lost the wheel of Brandon and couldn't catch back onto it for the rest of the race, and ended up finishing in 12th place. It was sloppy racing, to say the least, but I managed to get a few UCI points, so mission accomplished. That's all I've got for this video. If you want to see more videos like it, please hit that subscribe button and share with any of your friends. And if you're looking for a cycling coach, be sure to check out the Ignition Coach Co. website. The link is in the description. And until next time, y'all stay rad.